insurer of last resort in any state should never be competing with the private market.
Citizens is shedding, now under 1 million policies. The CEO right here live. DeSantis to defense? A state leader shuffle? We take it to the reporters on Florida's front lines. The crush at passport control.
We know elevators and escalators, primary issue.
Miami International Airport managing progress and public perception.
We have the escalator currently being modernized, which is another way of calling it a replacement.
The airport director with us live. Taking aim at gun safety law.
It's heartbreaking. It's very heartbreaking. And it's sad.
I'm seeing these young men that are dying to gun violence.
Can't continue like this.
This week, from D.C. to South Florida.
So in spite of the storm and the loud noise around it, this is stuff that the people of Florida want.
The big news of the week and the newsmakers live this week in South Florida. Good morning and welcome. 3D mental chess underway with the news the incoming president may consider Ron DeSantis for defense secretary. And we're going to take that to those who cover both closely. That's coming up. Though we begin today with one of your biggest Florida concerns, property insurance. The focus this week as the industry convened to take the pulse of recent reforms. Those at the summit in Orlando this week advised lawmakers to pause on more reforms and let those in place work. Also, Citizens, Florida's insurer of last resort, is now carrying fewer than 1 million policies for the first time in more than 2 years, a milestone that eases the risk on every Floridian. And we start right there with Tim Cerio, CEO of Florida's Citizens Property Insurance, and at that summit this week. Tim, great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Glenna. Great to be with you.
So I want to start with that milestone for you, the depopulation. I know that is a big goal, has been a big goal for the last few years of Citizens. And there is an upside, of course, but a downside as well to some of the customers. So I want to sort of get your take on where you are and where your clients are at the moment.
Sure. So we are, as of last week, we are down to about 987,000 policies. We think we're going to end the year just over 900,000. And that is good news for Floridians, especially Floridians who are not Citizens customers, who, if there ever was a series of catastrophic storms and Citizens couldn't pay its claims, non-Citizens Floridians or non-Citizens policyholders who have insurance, live in Florida, whether it's your home, your boat, car, et cetera, you would face an assessment. And that's something we desperately tried to avoid, which is why it's so important that Citizens shrink. For Citizens policyholders, our philosophy is we want to take really good care of you unless and until you find a better policy in the private market. And for some folks, they've been able to be depopulated out of Citizens, and they've gotten policies that are about the same, maybe even a little lower, but honestly, most probably will have to pay more. Because at Citizens, you essentially have, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, you're paying a subsidized rate. And that's not fair to the rest of Florida, who faces an assessment, again, if we can't pay claims.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, because I think a lot of people in Florida who are not Citizens customers really didn't realize that even they are on the hook for a situation where Citizens would not be solvent anymore. That risk is spread over every Floridian who has any kind of insurance policy. But I know in the new iteration and what you're trying to do, you actually have asked for a rate increase for your customers, and will likely get it, not quite 14%. And does that bring Citizens in line with private insurers? Will that be more competitive? And does that even matter, because you have to qualify for Citizens as well?
Well, that's actually a great question. Any increase will help us become more actuarially sound as a company and more competitive. And you've got two sort of competing laws in Florida. You have a law that limits Citizens' ability to raise rates. It's called the glide path, and this year the maximum is 14%. But you also have another place in Florida statutes that says we're supposed to charge actuarially sound non-competitive rates. And we have taken the position that we need to keep asking to get to that point of charging an actuarially sound, non-competitive rate, and then it's in the OIR's hands. The only thing I would, for citizens and non-citizens customers alike, I think the important thing to remember is that right now, we are not charging actuarially sound rates for the most part because of the glide path. That's not good. We need the surplus to be able to pay claims, to be able to avoid assessments. And so if you are a citizen's customer and you may have gotten taken out because, there's a new law that says if you get an offer from a private company, it's within 20% of what you're paying, you're no longer eligible for citizens.
Right, and for a lot of people, that 20% is going to be a huge hike for them.
That's right. But we have to remember, Glenna, is for most people, and not all people, but most citizens' customers, they're probably 30 to 40% below market already.
Yeah.
So even with the increase, they're still not going to be paying as much as they may be paying if they were already in the private market. So I'm not trying to minimize that fact. I don't want to pay more in insurance, but that is something that we try and be transparent and articulate regularly to our policyholders.
So who decides, now that the reforms of the past couple of years are bringing new private insurers back into the market because, frankly, it made the market better for the companies by design to make it more competitive and bring in more business. So all these companies are, well, I don't know about all, but there are several companies coming in. Who decides when a citizen's customer gets taken out and where they go? Is that the customer that decides? Do you decide? How does that work?
So these companies that come in, they will make application to the Office of Insurance Regulation. And the Office of Insurance Regulation, the OIR, our state regulator, I think has done a good job of vetting these companies, making sure that these, especially the new companies coming in, as well as the existing companies in Florida, have the financial wherewithal to be able to take policies out, because what we don't want is for these companies to fail and then these policyholders wind up back in Citizens again. It's not fair to the policyholder either. So the OIR makes that determination. They will establish a maximum amount of policies that each of these companies is allowed to try and take out. We will get those names. We will send out letters to the policyholders. So in some cases, these offers will be within 20% of what the policyholder is paying Citizens. They are no longer eligible to remain in Citizens. In other cases, if it's above 20%, the policyholder does have the option to stay in Citizens. They're allowed to stay. But we remind the policyholders that you've got to let us know. You or your insurance agent have got to let us know that you want to stay. So there's a lot of communication that goes on, and it's a process. This past year, we've had several takeouts, and about almost 500,000 policies will have been taken out once we hit December 31.
So this week, I want to do a little news of the week here. You had ordered an internal audit in Citizens to look into reporting from several outlets that Citizens was not paying a significant number of the claims from this year's spate of hurricanes. What are the questions that you have for that audit? So
the stories were generated, and they and I'm not putting the blame on anybody. These insurance issues can be kind of complicated, but when we had Debbie, Helene, and Milton, three major storms, and Debbie was not as a major wind event, but Debbie and Helene were major flood events for the impacted areas. And so what you have is a situation where for a hurricane policy for wind coverage, there is no coverage for flood damage, for storm surge. And that's
a whole separate policy.
That's right. And that's why the legislature passed a law a couple of years ago saying, if you're going to be with Citizens, you have to have flood coverage, because so often people thought they had coverage for flood and they didn't. Yeah. It is a separate policy. So what you saw were closure rates that are higher than normal because they were flood events. And unfortunately, that morphed into a narrative that Citizens was, I think one story said we denied 77% of all claims filed. That is absolutely untrue. What happens, though, is you have several things. If an insured if there's damage and it doesn't meet the deductible, the claim is placed in a closed status, but we actually encourage our policyholders to file those claims, because even if they don't meet their deductible, their annual deductible, they may before the end of the year if there are subsequent storms. And in fact, that did happen. Also, if the damage is flood only, of course, there's no coverage, so that would be placed in a closed status. And what we're trying to do is explain to folks that no matter what, if you are paid on a claim, or your claim is closed because maybe you haven't reached the deductible yet, it can always be reopened. And in fact, it is frequently reopened. Somebody may receive payment on a claim, they discover more damage, or maybe there's mold, they can ask and the claim will always be reopened. Similarly, if there was a claim was closed because it was flood, if they say, look, we have some additional information, we can show that there's wind damage too, the claim will be reopened. But short version of an already long story is, because you had these three storms together had so much flood and not wind damage, not only for citizens, but for others, you saw a higher rate of denial. To answer your question, I ordered the audit because according to our numbers, we think that the amount of claims closed of all claims filed for Helene, Debbie, and Milton, the actual number of claims closed because there was, there was no coverage covered by the policy, including for flood only, that figure was more like 13, almost 14%. So way off from 77%. But because we're a governmental entity and transparency is important, and we need our policyholders and other stakeholders to have confidence in us, I stand behind our numbers, but I am asking our Office of Internal Audit, which is independent of me, to conduct an audit and make sure that we're doing things the right way. And if there are mistakes, let us know what they are, and to make recommendations to how we can do things better going forward. But that's in an abundance of caution. I'm confident that the results will pan out favorably, but if they don't, we need to know.
Yeah, that is great clarification. And, as we sit here, we have a largely South Florida audience that largely escaped all of that, looking sort of from the outside in. But Tim Cerio, CEO of Citizens, great to have you on the program. I certainly do appreciate your time today, and I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely. Great to be with you again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, what happens if the governor joins the pool of Florida recruits to the incoming Trump administration? We go behind the headlines in a reporter roundtable next. Word that President-elect Trump dropped the possibility of DeSantis as defense secretary. That news, should current nominee Pete Hegseth's alleged scandal force a change? Well, it dropped like a news bomb on Florida's political world. No confirmation, no response at all from the governor's camp, but plenty of fantasy planning underway for a big Florida shuffle. And no one better to fill in the blanks than veteran journalists who cover it most. Mark Caputo, veteran political reporter with the Bulwark Online. Jesse Scheckner, where are you? There you are, Jesse Scheckner, covering the political landscape in South Florida and beyond for Florida politics. So welcome, everybody. I love talking to you both, and you are just like right on the front lines of the governor and the incoming Trump administration. And, you just shared with me that you coulda, woulda, shoulda tweeted first about the governor as defense secretary news. So you were like the first to know.
I wouldn't say I was the first to know, but I was among them. And at first I was like, you got to be kidding me. I knew DeSantis.
That's what we all said.
Yeah, well, I knew DeSantis had this conversation with Trump for a number of months, but it never quite gelled. The information or the conversation between the two, Trump and DeSantis, about the defense secretary job was sparked by the initial reports of Pete Hegseth's problems. It was quiet for 36 hours, but once it started to leak out in Trump world, a number of Trump consultants despised DeSantis from the campaign and before. Yeah. Some of them used to work for him. They're the ones that leaked it because they wanted to stop this from happening. The last thing they want is DeSantis in the administration.
Well, I mean, you cover sort of the Florida end of it. There's nobody talking about this in Florida that I found. Maybe you found somebody. Nobody is not even confirming, just kind of behind the scenes handicapping what the dominoes might be. I mean, what are the chances?
Well, on record, right? There's certainly enough chatter going on behind the scenes. It's an interesting potential thing happening. I really doubt that he'd take it if it were offered to him. I think he likes being in the executive role here. I think it may put him in a weird position where he wouldn't be able to challenge whomever Trump backs in the next presidential election. the question is what he does if he does finish out his gubernatorial term. Will he go directly into a campaign? Will he drift off into the political wilderness for a little while?
So that's a really good point, because his term ends in 26. If he does not take, I mean, DOD is a huge job, yet it's an advisor, a department head to Donald Trump. And to your point, the relationship there, which is thawing, is still, I mean, Ron DeSantis he's a leadership role, and would he go there?
Yes, he would. The relationship with him is actually very good from everything I've been told for a number of months.
Relationship, but what about hierarchy? That's a different thing.
He is, from what I understand, willing to do it under some circumstances.
Oh, yeah?
The big problem that DeSantis is going to have is who wants to go work for a guy who can fire you with a social media post? And just might, not just could, but has done that in the past to other people. That's a little bit of a risk. So there are all these sort of moving parts. And then there's the specter of Lara Trump and the Senate seat. Marco Rubio is leaving to become the Secretary of State. That seat is open. Ron DeSantis, the governor, is in charge of filling it. Lara Trump, the president-elect's daughter-in-law, wants it. It starts to look like a horse trade. DeSantis does not want a horse trade. He doesn't think Lara Trump has paid her Florida dues. So that's an issue. So
do you see a scenario where he considers going to DOD, and then I guess the timeline, right? The timeline is what counts. Puts someone other than Lara Trump in there just so it's not a horse trade, or maybe because he's going to be vetting people, said he's going to make the decision next month. I mean, he's not going to do a horse trade, and he's not going to do the perception of a horse trade. Is that what you're saying?
That is my understanding, but you know, one thing about making bright lines is that sometimes it's easy to step over them.
What does that even mean?
What I mean is sometimes people have a limit, and then all of a sudden they don't have the limit anymore. At one point, Ron DeSantis wasn't running for president against Donald Trump, who helped basically make him governor.
Yeah.
Then he was.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Jesse, is there, you cover state so closely. I know you used to, and now you went to the MAGA world to cover. Jesse, what is Tallahassee and the people in power and leadership saying about the potential of Jeanette Nunez rising to governor?
She would bring a bit more of a moderate approach to things.
Still?
I think so.
Moderate in tone, at least.
Yes, yeah. In fact, she's been, reluctant to take on the press head on as much as DeSantis has. I mean, you rewind back a couple of years when those comments came out about potentially busing Cuban migrants out of the state, and she issued a Twitter statement and then referred everybody to that rather than speak on the issue out front. That's a skill that she's going to need to bring back, speaking publicly and those sorts of things in those sorts of capacities. She's been in politics for 30 years, on and off,
and a member of the state legislature. So she's kind of a colleague to the, if not in timing, she's a colleague in practice to the incoming session, which is an incoming session where Ron DeSantis is not running for president, and the relationship might be a bit more independent than we saw last time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that again, it all depends on how these dominoes fall and whichever way people choose, but it's a very interesting prospect.
So let me talk about the timing a little bit. I realize that everything we're talking about is hypothetical at the moment, which is kind of a weird for a news program.
The likelihood of Hegseth stepping down soon is getting lower by the day. The Trump transition believes the longer he's in there, the greater his chances, and he was able to survive this critical first week, and now the next 2 weeks they're going to be watching closely. If the Senate goes out of session, Hegseth hasn't withdrawn, his chances rise even higher.
Well, and President-elect Trump also sort of through his support doubled down on him, and so what are the chances that senators are going to defy that?
I guess we're going to see. The thing that the Trump transition believes is that if this goes to a vote, it's pretty close to nil, that he's going to get confirmed. It's not going to be a big confirmation, but he's going to get it.
So you know what? I want to take a quick break because I want to come back. I want to talk a little bit about the Marco Rubio nomination and sort of how that plays into the calculus of Florida, or might some more mental gymnastics when we come right back. Stay tuned. We are back with the roundtable. Mark Caputo with the Bulwark, Jesse Scheckner with Florida Politics. Jesse, you brought up a really interesting topic of immigration as we watch the ebb and flow of what our leadership does right now, focus on the border and border security. However, Marco Rubio, if he should be Secretary of State, he's probably one of the nominees that there is not a lot of controversy about. Yeah. We'll just start with there, but say if Jeanette Nunez rises to governor, I mean, both of these Miami Cuban Americans have had a real kind of sea change on their immigration views.
Yeah. Recently, Marco Rubio delivered a speech on the issue, and while he did not outright call the immigration issue that occurred before Biden issued the executive order that apparently he could have done anytime, he did not outright call it an invasion, but he couched his comments in saying that this is not immigration within comments or within reference to it being called an invasion at the southern border and so on and so forth.
Do you think, though, he's just like parsing his words because of the political atmosphere?
Yeah. It's expert politispeak. He's become great at it, but it certainly is more of a rightward shift in that sort of policy. Jeanette Nunez, similarly, she was very, she passed that bill back when she was in the House that DeSantis tried to do away with, but was unable to, that extends to, people who were brought here as children in state college tuition fees. A very, compassionate bill.
Yeah.
And I don't know that she would distance herself from that sort of approach or outlook if she were to get the governor's office, but definitely the rhetoric around it has changed to it being a lot more hostile.
And, I remember, 10 years ago, there was the Gang of Eight, and there were South Florida lawmakers involved. And
Rubio was one of them.
Rubio was one of them. I was going to say the comprehensive immigration reform that he now says it won't work, and it has to be piecemeal. So is that out? That's out the
That's
out
a
the door.
change, but far be it from me to defend Marco Rubio here, but his rhetoric is not that shocking a change, and his policy is not that shocking a change, because the 2013 Gang of Eight bill said border enforcement and security first. It was build the wall, build a virtual wall as well. It wasn't all sticks and mortar. And what happened is, number one, the party rejected that in the House. Then the Republican Party rejected that in the election of Donald Trump because it had this amnesty provision in it. Now, Biden came into office, withdrew Trump's executive orders, and people can debate. I don't believe that Joe Biden intentionally wanted to cause a surge of people at the border, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And millions of people came in who were not vetted. And there are very few people who look at that as a good idea. And among those who think it's a bad idea is Rubio.
And do you think, along with those changes, public sentiment has changed as well?
I think the polling shows that, definitely. I mean, look at this county.
Yeah.
Donald Trump went from losing this county, where 51% of people are born in a foreign country, in another country. He lost it by 29 percentage points in 2016. He won it by 13 now? I mean, come on. And he didn't do that by mollifying his position on immigration, not at all.
Yeah, you think that?
Yeah. It's the question as to whether or not the mass deportation that's being contemplated with the use of the U.S. military is going to actually go forward as such. That would be devastating to a lot of families and communities, the economy of Florida, of which I think 7% are estimated to be undocumented migrants. They contribute like $2 billion in tax revenue to the state yearly.
Yeah.
And they're largely doing jobs that, typically don't go or people don't pursue if they're born and raised here.
And we in the past couple of weeks, we've had Congress people on. We've had Carlos Jimenez, Republicans, Mario Diaz-Balart, who all of them across the board say, it's going to be the criminals first. And, they're speaking to their own community. And it's nice because the people largely who are here are not criminals, but families and employees and whatever. But yeah, we'll see. Can we do do we have time for a little sea change here? You heard Tim Cerio from Citizens on right in the segment before you. Depopulation, they're making it work, and
they're making it work.
You're a bit skeptical of that.
I'm not just skeptical. Tim Cerio has a job to do, so I don't want to call him a propagandist, but he is spreading the propaganda that Citizens is broken, that it's bad, and that depopulation is a solution. And the reality is insurance works by spreading risk. And by depopulating citizens, you actually make it financially less stable. And then you justify its lack of financial stability by saying, oh, it's not working and we've got to depopulate it.
So I guess he would say you're spreading it over private companies instead of over Floridians who pay for their policies.
Yes, but rates are rising. So he's admitted that now you have to pay 20% more off the top. I have a house in Miami-Dade County. I pay $12,000 a year. House I've owned since 2011. I've made 0 claims on it. It's been there since 1932. It's uninsurable.
Yeah.
My deductible is so high, it's basically the cost of the new roof. It's a total scam. The way in which insurance could work here that the legislature refuses to contemplate because A, the Tallahassee is a wholly owned subsidiary of the insurance lobby, and B, because they're conservatives, they refuse to contemplate the idea of socialized insurance, is actually spreading citizens statewide to make it work, and therefore spreading the risk and lowering rates.
Actually, there were 2 lawmakers who floated that idea last year, Spencer Roach and Hillary. Help me with her last name. I'm having Cassell, thank you. Hillary Cassell was here. Sorry, Hillary Cassell. So they were here, bipartisan, floating an idea of making citizens windstorm only for everybody in the state. Any appetite for that, do you think?
I mean, to those that are impacted by wind, it'd be great, but there's a lot more that goes into it, and sometimes those things are interconnected. You know, storms typically don't come just dry with wind. They come with a lot more. And so are we supposed to have multi-tiered insurance?
Well, we have windstorm and we have flood.
Well, yeah, but they're frequently offered by the same provider.
No, they're not.
No?
So, flood insurance was not open. It's not citizens.
It's a national pool, which
and
actually
it's a socialized pool. That is to my point.
So this
Sorry
session,
to point. I didn't mean to point.
You can point.
I'm
it's a free country.
About
point.
This.
I can see. So this session at the summit in Orlando on Wednesday, the insurance people from the state of Florida are it's sort of telegraphing to lawmakers, reforms are working, so nothing more. You expect anything more?
One would hope.
Well, you know what I think they are looking at is beefing up the My Safe Florida Home Plan, which kind of ran out of money like that the first time.
Apparently, I thought, but they ran out the first time, they ran out the second time. They apparently don't need to advertise it. People have a big appetite for those sorts of things.
We talk about it. That's enough.
Last session, they extended it to condos as well, through legislation by, South Florida lawmakers Vicki Lopez, Christine Hunschofsky, Jennifer Bradley Fleming.
Okay, I paid my dues on that one.
Yeah, there we go. But it's a great program. It's really smart, and of course, houses are more insurable, or at least more appetizing to insurance companies to give rates to that are usable in large senses if those homes are shored up against storms. Other legislation like the safety, the Resiliency and Safe Structures Act that they passed that affect coastal communities that there's a lot of pushback on. These are growing pains that need to happen for this market to become stabilized, and that's not speaking to what the insurance companies themselves need to do.
And notably, when Cerio was talking to you, he admitted there have been 3 windstorm events, 3 hurricanes. Citizen has been able to cover all of those, and that doomsday scenario that he was saying, like, oh, everyone's going to get an assessment when there's a big storm. Well, 3 hit, and that didn't happen. It's total, I don't know if I can say.
You can't.
It's total BS.
Like you, I'm better. The whole insurance industry has so many layers and is so complicated and all predicated on looking at something that has not happened yet, and so then you get that scenario. Anyway, okay, we are out of time. Jesse, Scheckner, Mark Caputo, you are the best, and I appreciate your time coming in here. And I hope you'll come back after we don't have to predict anymore, and we can report in hindsight.
Always a good thing.
Always a good thing. Yeah, all right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, big travel months, South Florida's big airport, and big questions about how MIA can manage the load during a major upgrade. The man at the top is here to answer those questions next. This is the future of Miami International Airport and its multi-billion-dollar, multi-year plan into the 21st century. Now, this was the present situation for a few hours this week at Passport Control when a broken escalator and an elevator under repair created a crowded, frustrating bottleneck. The upgrades and the malfunctions are all happening at the same time at one of the busiest international airports in the country. Ralph Coutier is Miami International's director on the front lines of the modernizing underway and also the public criticism from those expecting a better travel experience. Right here with us live. Good morning. Good afternoon. What time is it? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Glenna. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I just want to acknowledge that when 95% of everything is working just fine, it's the 5% of what's broken that makes the news headlines. But, you know, in our own defense, it was a pretty busy airport and a pretty difficult situation for a lot of people this week, which is why we brought it about. But, you know, describe what is happening there. And, you know, is it like whack-a-mole where you're just trying to fix things as they come while you're doing these upgrades?
Well, no, we have a very comprehensive, organized plan for making our modernizations. I think when you and I spoke before, we're currently engaged in a $9 billion modernization and capital program. So out of that $9 billion, about 1.7 of it is modernization of existing infrastructure. And some of that includes elevators, escalators, moving walks, renovating restrooms, loading bridges. And it just so happens that this past weekend, actually, we had a very, very smooth Thanksgiving holiday. That 12-day Thanksgiving period, we welcomed 1.9 million passengers through our airport, and it was a really, really smooth operation with the exception of that one hiccup that night, and that was the result of an escalator that was being modernized, which is another word for replacement in the industry. And you know, that specific unit is going to be put back in service at the end of December, but we happen to have multiple flights come in at one time at that gate or at those gates, and that created the congestion, which lasted about 30 minutes. So, I mean, we're a victim of our progress, but I will tell you, we're making very, very good progress and attacking that head on.
Good. Well, good to hear. I mean, we've been following this launched, I think, at the beginning of this year, at least formally. Maybe it was going on a bit before that. But, you know, while we hear about this amazing project underway, we also heard about, and I think you showed one of our crews, the cracks in the concrete in the SkyTrain, which last year closed the SkyTrain, much of it reopened by now. But, you know, things like green fluorescent stuff poured out of the ceiling and broken escalators and elevators, which, of course, at the airport with people with luggage and people who aren't able-bodied pose a real issue. But before you were the chief at the airport, you were in facilities management. Is this all of a sudden? Because you must have seen signs of this coming, no?
Well, we've been working on this from before I was even director, and I've been director now for 3.5 years, and we've been actively attacking all these areas from before. I think what's happening now is we are investing unprecedented amounts of resources on that. Like I said, $9 billion of investment in our airport is an unprecedented number. I mean, we haven't invested that amount of money in the airport, and it's in our history. So I think we are, like I said before, we're actively attacking all those pain points. We've mapped out all the pain points in the passenger path of travel from the moment, what we call from the cabin to the curb. So from the moment a passenger arrives at MIA, you know, for example, all of our loading bridges, we're actively engaged in a loading bridge replacement program. We've already replaced 32 bridges. That's $235 million of investment. So out of the $9 billion, $1.7 billion, as I mentioned, is for modernization. So we are investing $235 million in loading bridges, currently $103 million in restrooms, nearly $700 million in elevators and escalators. So just when you take all that into it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I understand, and you're working on it, and that's a fair point. But the contractors that are doing this, I guess I'm really focused on how to fix things that come up. So to your point, you want passengers to have 100% a terrific experience. So the contractors who are doing these upgrades, do they do emergency work? Can you tell them to come on in and fix elevator X because it just broke down? And I know that's not on your plate at the moment, but are they able to do that?
Sure, absolutely. So these new contracts include multiple facets. They include preventive maintenance, they include additional predictive maintenance, they include major repairs, and they include the final solution, which is obviously modernizations and replacements. So yes, right now, the contractors we have specifically for conveyance systems, elevators, escalators, and moving walks, those contractors and those contracts have built into the contracts weekend service, after hours service. So when things break down, they come out and fix them. But ultimately, what's going to get us going and where we've made a lot of progress over the last year. Our Board of County Commissioners approved these contracts with the mayor's support. She's been very supportive of everything we're doing, and I'm very grateful for that. Since we've started, we have made tremendous amount of progress, and as you mentioned, we're at 95% now of units operational, and that number will fluctuate as we continue to modernize units. But to answer your question, yes, the contractors are on call 24/7, so when something breaks down, they respond right away. In the case of what happened this past Sunday, it happened to be a unit that was being replaced, and that will go a long way towards relieving the congestion in that area as soon as it comes back up and running.
So you, I know that the airport is kind of, there's a word for it that I'm not quite sure. I know it's kind of self-sustaining. You don't get a county budget, you make
Correct.
your own money. Is there a point where the mayor or the commissioner says to you, you director have emergency power, you can make those decisions, or does everything have to go through them?
Well, as far as contract awards for large contracts, obviously they have to go to our Board of County Commissioners for approval. But I do have some delegated authority when emergencies are declared to make sure that we get things taken care of on an emergency basis. For example, you mentioned the SkyTrain. In that particular case, we declared an emergency and we went ahead and hired the correct consultants and contractors to make sure that they could come on board right away and make the repairs. And we actually got the repairs done in record time. Within 6 months, got 3/4 of the system back up and running and averted a potential catastrophe. And that's what I like to tell people. I mean, I consider the SkyTrain, from our perspective, one of our finest moments, because the cracks were discovered during a routine inspection and we jumped on it right away. And again, we were able to get 3/4 of the system repaired and back up and running and get the structural repairs done within 6 months' time. I mean, if you ask anybody in the industry that has a structural engineering background, they'll tell you that in many cases will take several years, and we get it done much faster.
So when's the last quarter opening?
The last quarter, we expect to open sometime middle of next year. Those 3 pier caps and columns had some more severe cracks that are going to involve a little more extensive work, but we're already working on it. And that work should start now after our busy holiday season in January and continue on into the summer.
Ralph Goutier, Director of Miami International Airport. Great to learn about the airport. Thanks for the update.
Glenna, thank you so much. And we want to make sure we bring you out and give you a tour and show you everything we're doing. We're very excited about all the progress we're making.
I love behind the scenes. I'll take it. Thanks.
Great.
All right. Next, one South Florida lawmaker working the front lines of gun safety is just back from D.C., and she's right here with us next. The spate of shootings around South Florida in recent weeks puts back in the headlines questions of how to stop the gun violence. The politics of gun rights and responsibility sometimes overshadows the fact that safer streets is a goal that unites lawmakers across the aisle. In D.C. this week, state lawmakers met with the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention about just that, and one of Florida's lawmakers most involved in that work was part of it. State Rep. Christine Hunschofsky, Democrat from Parkland, former mayor there during the mass shooting at Stoneman Douglas High, and co-chair of Legislators for Safer Communities in D.C. this week, right here with us today. Rep. Hunschofsky, great to see you.
Great to see you, Glenna. Thanks for having me.
Of course, really interested to find out. You met with senators and members of Congress, and it said behind closed doors. So, my first question is, take us in, raise the curtain. What did you learn about?
Yeah, so a lot of what our discussion was that with the impending change in the administration, what would be next from a federal perspective and what would be next for a state perspective. So we were a little concerned that things on the federal level would stop progressing like they had been with the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and things like that. And so we wanted to go up there to talk about what work has been done in the past several years to make our community safer and to prevent gun violence, and what can we be doing more of in the states in the meantime to help support what's going on in a federal level and maybe at times compensate for what may not be going forward on a federal level going forward.
So it was huge news right after the shooting at Douglas High that Florida, then a conservative legislature still, and then under Governor Rick Scott, passed some unprecedented state law, raised the purchase age of a gun to 21, red flag laws, background checks. I mean, it was You know, it was huge, and they stand today, but there since has been an attempt to roll back some of them. Do you see an appetite going into this session from your colleagues to do anything more or less?
I hope that going forward, my colleagues will look into doing more for community violence intervention programs and doing more to keep our communities safe. The legislation that was passed in a bipartisan fashion in 2018, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act, has been in many ways the gold standard for a response to a mass shooting to make sure that our schools and communities are safer. And I would hope that that would stay intact and that we then look more to what's happening in our communities. What can we do from a safer storage perspective, from a suicide prevention perspective? Unfortunately, sometimes the whole gun safety and community safety issue gets mired by both sides becoming really hyperbolic in how they approach it. And a lot of gun violence prevention is also making sure that we're having the mental health supports we need when we need them, that we have safer storage, that the people who own guns, that they're taking precautions to make sure that they're handling them responsibly, and to make sure that no one who wishes to do harm to themselves or someone else is able to access a firearm.
You know, before we began the program, I actually looked up to see what bills have been filed so far, because they're starting to really roll in. And your colleague, Representative Hinson, Democrat from Alachua County, I know Northwest Florida, she actually filed a bill dealing with guns kept, it sounds like guns kept in cars. You know, do you foresee in the supermajority conservative legislature that has in past sessions really kind of, I want to use the word ignored what Democrats tried to do, and even amendments to their bills? Do you foresee any of this time? You know, State Rep Danny Perez, now from Miami, now the leader, he was here not too long ago, and it sounded like he really wanted to listen to his members and see where they're going with things. Are you confident in that?
Listen, I hope that our colleagues will listen to it. Representative Hinson filed this bill in previous years. She has worked with committee staff. I know she's worked with stakeholders on it as well. And this is all just about being responsible as a gun owner, making sure that your guns are safely stored if they're in your vehicle, to prevent them from getting into the hands of people who wouldn't have passed a background check and wouldn't have otherwise had access to a gun.
You know, I want to go back to something you said. I know you do a lot of work in the mental health space, not just about guns and weapons, but holistically. And that was a huge part of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act. What's next? Are you filing anything else to add to that?
Yeah, currently I already filed a social worker compact bill to allow reciprocity for social workers. I will continue to, for those who aren't aware, we do now, thanks to legislation I sponsored and that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. We have a Florida Commission on Mental Health and Substance Use Disorder. I serve on that at the pleasure of the speaker. And we have come up with a bunch of recommendations again this year for the legislature and the governor to consider in order to make access to quality mental health and substance use disorder care better in the state of Florida. So there is continual work to be done, and I'm really grateful to my colleagues and leadership for continuing to support that work.
There's going to be a lot to talk about. State Rep Christine Hunschofsky, great to have you, and I know you will be back often soon.
Thanks so much, Glenna.
All right, take care, and we'll be right back. That is our program for today. Links to all the interviews to see and share, plus This Week in South Florida podcast. It's all on local10.com, and you can scan that QR code right there, and it takes you there. We want to hear from you about today's program or anything in the news. Our email is our initials, TWISF@WPLG.com. And you can also find me on social media at Glenna WPLG. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. Have a great day. And remember, keep in touch.